Welcome to Questions That Matter, where we discuss interesting and important work done at TrustBridge. Today we have with us Bhavin Patel, who has been doing a lot of work on regulatory governance at TrustBridge. One of the areas of work within regulatory governance is the evaluation of how the electricity regulators in this country are performing. We did one paper on evaluating the performance of the Tamil Nadu electricity regulator at APTEL, which is the appellate body that hears cases or appeals from the regulator. So Bhavin, welcome. And before we delve into what we actually did in the paper, can you tell us a little bit about the structure of the ERCs and what is it that you were thinking of when you set out to do this evaluation?
Sure. So, if you're new to how the governance of electricity works in this country, then it's important to know a few basic facts. So, the first thing is that we had a set of reforms in 1998 or thereabouts, as a result of which we had the introduction of a set of bodies called electricity regulatory commissions. And since electricity is a concurrent list subject, which means both the center and the states have some degree of power over that sector, there are both state ERCs in each state as well as a central electricity regulatory commission. And like many other regulators, these ERCs combine the powers that you would typically think should be separated in governance. So they have quasi-legislative powers, they have executive powers, of course, they also have quasi-judicial powers. So how do we understand whether these regulators are doing their job properly? How do we measure their performance? Many things that are done by the ERCs as a part of their executive function, the documentation for that is not easily available to us, and so we can't study that easily. Some of the legislative materials are available, but the judicial materials are certainly available to us. So any orders that these ERC pass in exercise of their functions are available. Another set of documents that we can easily access is, as you mentioned, appeals from these orders go to the APTEL. The APTEL publishes its decisions on its website. We can easily access these and study these. And so we said, all right, here's one way that we can evaluate the performance of ERCs. We were doing a lot of work on the Tamil Nadu electricity sector anyway, and so we said that this would be a good addition to that bouquet of work.
So every time one is trying to measure the performance of something, you need some benchmarks against which to measure that performance, right? So how do I know that something is good or bad unless in theory or I have a normative view of what it should be? And for this paper then, what was the thinking behind creating those benchmarks?
Certainly. The first thing to say outright is that we don't have any clear benchmarks in the literature for what is, for example, a good appeal rate. If I pass 100 orders today and there are 30 appeals from that, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is there something to be said about 50 appeals, 70 appeals? We don't know this. And so, at least as far as the appeal rate is concerned, it's difficult to determine. What we've been able to approximate is, for the period of 10 years that we are studying, from 2013 to 2023, there were 84 appeals that went up to APTEL from TNERC orders. We look at the information in the TNERC's own annual reports, and we take a sample of 10% of orders, and we find that the appeal rate is about 8%. Is that good? Is that bad? Honestly, one has to make up one's own mind about that. So that's one set of things. But the other set of questions to ask is, all right, you have 84 appeals. What happens in these? And there we are able to draw some judgments. We find that in these 84 appeals that go up, one way to determine whether the ERC is doing its job properly in the first instance is whether the appeal is dismissed or allowed. If the appeal is dismissed, that means the ERC's order is upheld, and that's a good thing. If the appeal is fully or partially allowed, it means that the ERC has lost some ground. Why is this a bad thing? For a number of reasons, two of which are, first of all, this affects the certainty of the ERC's decision. If I am a power sector participant, I would like some certainty and predictability. And so, if the ERC's decision can be overturned in appeal, a significant number of times I don't have that predictability, I don't have that certainty. I can't take business decisions. And the second thing is, I take a decision at the ERC, that takes some amount of time. Then I go up in appeal, that might take, let's say, another year or two. My appeal may be remanded back, and so the ERC has to reconsider the matter, and all of this adds up to significant delays in the sector, which are obviously avoidable.
And so what do you find once you study all of these orders and what the status of the appeals was? What is it looking like? So you did give us some numbers around 8% appeal rate from a sample, but for these 84 orders, what were the key highlights?
Sure. I'm going to take a moment before I answer that to also describe what is the information that we're pulling out from these appeals, right? So we've got 84 appeals. Great. We can't just look at whether the appeal is allowed or dismissed. That gives us a very superficial view of what's happening here. And so the team at TrustBridge put together a set of 82 indicators. Now, these are different data points that we're drawing out from every single order. Some are very straightforward. What is the name of the parties who are involved? Who are the people on the bench taking the decision? What are the dates? So on and so forth. But we're also delving into what sort of questions are being litigated here? What are the issues that are being involved? And so for every single one of these 84 documents, a team of lawyers at TrustBridge read through it manually, extracted this 82 points of information, exchanged orders, we did our standard verifications, and then we get this data set, right? Our stage is now set. You've got 84 documents, 82 points of information. What's the story that's coming out? A dismal one. In more than half, this is 52%, we find that the regulator loses some or all ground, which means that the appeal is either fully or partially allowed. This is worrisome. This means that an appeal effectively is a coin toss. There's a good chance that the ERC's order will be completely set aside. In nearly a quarter, that's 20 out of 84 appeals, we find that the order is remanded. We spoke about why remands are a problem because of the delays, because of all the time that keeps getting added up in the process. But fine, you also have information about what are the issues that are being litigated and when is it that a remand is usually ordered. In general terms, an appellate court or tribunal could order a remand if it doesn't have enough information on the record to make up its own mind about the matter. So you could say that in the first instance, despite having the powers of a civil court, the ERC did not even collect enough evidence so that an appellate tribunal could come to its own independent decision. But on a subjective reading, more and more worrying trends emerge. You misclassified the petition when it was filed at the first instance. You refused to exercise jurisdiction when you clearly had it. In one instance, we found that there was a remand because the ERC, which is itself a delegatee of quasi-judicial power, subdelegated some of its powers to the distribution company, which it is not authorized to do. But more worryingly, this is a matter in which the distribution company is interested.
Right.
And the ERC is delegating some of its powers to Tangentco. Many cases involve procedural irregularities. This is particularly worrying because these are straightforward to identify, relatively straightforward to fix. And it's worrying that this data is not being considered because it could easily lead to some quick solutions.
Right. So, what's interesting here is that procedural matters also seem to be rather high in this data set. But, what one can take away from that also is that perhaps this is low-hanging fruit and that this can be resolved more easily than, maybe some of the substantive issues that come to the ERC and then go back to the APTEL.
Certainly.
Going forward, you've done this for one ERC. What is it that you and the team hopes to do? There are many ERCs in this country. So, what's our plan?
That's right. So there's a lot of work to be done here, which is encouraging, which is something that motivates us because, as you said, one of the things to do is there are lots of ERCs. Let's look at all of them. Let's compare them against each other. And we've done some of this work, but there are encouraging signs from this early work in the sense that there are some things that are happening better at some ERCs. And so perhaps one ERC, the TNERC, has something to learn from how Maharashtra is working. Maharashtra perhaps has something to learn from how another state is working. And these are things that we can easily put together and point out. As far as we're aware, this comparative data set does not exist out there today. And that's something that we're hoping to supply. There is a deeper level of analysis that we can dig into. For example, we found again in the TNERC dataset that in 61% of appeals involving tariff determination, which is the bread and butter work of an ERC, and this is what you're supposed to do, the ERC loses. So what's going wrong there? Is there a need to rationalize your regulation? Is there a need to perhaps make tariff calculations simpler and easier? We're hoping that by reading these decisions, looking at what's happening across states, we can come up with some insights that we can take to the regulator and which hopefully the regulator might consider. The fond hope in the long term is that this helps improve investability in the sector and the energy transition for the country.
That sounds like a wonderful plan, Bhavin, and I wish you the best. In fact, I wish both of us the best in this journey. So if you want to read more and understand more about what we have done in this paper, the manual, the data sets, the paper are all available on our website. So please check out the website and keep an eye out for all the new work that we are doing on comparing different ERCs on some of these metrics. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.